We've talked about this before, but everybody's curious about this. How is it you have this uncanny sense of choosing a serious subject that fascinates us? This having to be physics and going back to a previous time, quantum teletransportation, which is what? What is that?
Quantum teleportation?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's something that has just been demonstrated, or just last year, in several laboratories around the world, and it's talked about as if it were beaming up Scotty. It's not really exactly. It's a transfer of a certain kind of information from one photon to another is what they're doing, but it implies instantaneous transportation of information across distances that doesn't matter how far, across the entire universe, and it's a very curious thing.
And you have to understand how time works, don't you, and how the speed of light works and all of that.
Well, it's pushing at some of those notions. In other words, before quantum teleportation was demonstrated, there was a lot of thought among physicists that it might or might not actually be a real phenomenon. I mean, there was speculation. Now it turns out it is real.
What's real?
That this kind of transfer can occur instantaneously with nothing in between, no carrier mechanism.
This book is about archaeologist from Yale going back to the 1357, the 14th century, traveling back to rescue one of their own, to bring back in 1999. That's not real.
No, not as far as I'm aware.
But that is part of the idea of quantum physics and teleportation. Yes? Or does it draw on that or not?
It does, but I mean,
you've taken a literal imagination here.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I don't want to say that quantum technology is going to lead to time travel. I don't think that's a fair thing to say.
Well, do you believe it will?
I don't know.
That's even more interesting. You don't know. I mean, do you believe it's highly unlikely, or do you believe it's possible?
I believe it's possible. If I had to guess, if you asked me to bet, I would bet against it.
What makes you think it's even remotely possible that somebody could travel back to the 14th century?
It's not clearly contradicted by theory. But I mean, that's really the... You know what I mean? I mean, there are certain kinds of things that...
I really don't know what you mean, because I know nothing about physics, but go ahead.
Well, if you have an accepted theory, then it has certain consequences that follow from that. And if those... I mean, the simple one is it does seem to be very unlikely that you can travel faster than light. And one of the issues about quantum teleportation is it seems to be nudging at that or potentially causing a problem. But in general, we believe you can't travel faster than light. So if you write a story in which someone travels faster than light, that's an impossible story, according to what we believe now. I try and stay within the boundaries of what's not understood to be impossible, even though there's dispute about it.
All right, let me frame this way, because this is interesting. You and the idea is interesting. Knowing what you did, in so many other books that grabbed our attention, because you were on the cutting edge of what people were talking about, whether it was sexual harassment and disclosure, whether it had to do with the rise of Japan and Rising Sun, and so many more, having especially to do with dinosaurs and all that came out of that. Where did you first get the idea? When did you say, Michael, there's a book here?
I don't know.
Okay, but about when? What started the process for you? You're reading a magazine and there's a story about...
No, this is odd. This was an odd one in a way, because for a long time I had wanted to do a time travel story. One reason is that I'm attracted to the challenge of trying to write a story that will be persuasive even for a few hours on some subject that's impossible or highly, highly unlikely. All the time I was writing Jurassic Park, I kept thinking, this is a dinosaur story.
Yeah.
And is anybody going to go for this?
But that's your commercial sense too. I mean, some would say it's a story about biogenetics, and you're saying no, it's a dinosaur story, which shows you your instinct for what sells, as does your ability to make people keep turning the pages. That's an instinct for what sells, the way you write. You'll give me that?
But I don't know how I do this.
Okay. But you know it's there.
Yes.
And you know it's a story about dinosaurs rather than some highfalutin idea of biogenetics.
That's right. I mean, that's been carried. And it was not obvious to me when I was writing it that I could get away with this, that I could carry it off. That people would say, oh, yeah. And you know, the first people who read it, quite by accident, were people in bioengineering fields. Yeah. And I was watching them just gulp it right down, and I thought, wow. You know, we did it.
We got something here.
Yeah. And another equally challenging kind of a story is time travel.
All right, Ray Bradbury, Distant Thunder. What was that about?
Is that the one about the dinosaur?
Yeah, well, time travel, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people go back to hunt a dinosaur and somebody steps on the butterfly.
Right. So that's exactly right. Changes what happens in the future. Right.
There's actually a really interesting book by a physicist named Paul Nahan, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, and about time machines. And one of the things he does is he summarizes all the writing that's occurred in the past, which is, in a way, very discouraging, because what you realize is that almost every kind of, all the changes have been wrong. And in fact, most of them have been wrong by the 1920s. So there isn't really any new thing to do there.
If someone says to you, you're marrying thriller with science fiction, you say, not so much fiction.
I hope, yeah.
Yes, a thriller. Yes, a novel. But less science fiction than you might imagine.
That's always my intent, or my effort.
Calling card.
Yeah. Yeah, because, for example, when you're talking about quantum physics, it's very, very difficult. And I'm hardly, a person to really be knowledgeable. When I'm looking at this, it's so hard to describe it at all. I recognize that there's a certain level where a physicist would say, yes, that's the correct way to state it. But no one would get it at all. No reader would understand it. And then there's another way, which is pretty easy to understand, but the physicist would say, no, it's completely wrong. Somewhere in the middle is a way of putting this information that's okay to read for a reader, and the physicist will say, well, okay. And that's what I'm trying to, that's where I'm trying to get this. It's some balance between what's technically accurate and what's understandable.